Good evening, and welcome to the Murfreesboro City School Board meeting. We will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and since this is Mr. Hopper's last meeting, we will ask him to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll stand for a moment of silence.
Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. If I could get a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Good evening, Dr. Gilbert.
Good evening.
We're now ready for communication.
I think that our first communication you are handling, Ms. Wade, and this is for Mr. Hopper.
This is a toughie. We've served together for a while. We're friends. Mr. Hopper, it's been a lot said, and I know there's going to be a lot said after I present you with this award from the board and system, and let you know how much you've meant to us in the capacity you've served as board member and board chair. You've been a mentor to many. You've been a friend to many. And we hate to see you go, but I know retirement is wonderful. You've proven that. We had trouble keeping up with you. But at this time, on behalf of the Murfreesboro City Schools and this wonderful board, we'd like to present to Mr. Hopper the Outstanding Service Award, board member and chair, 1983-2010. Thank you, Mr. Hopper, for a job well done. Please stand. Mr. Hopper, is there anything you would like to say?
Well, I guess I made my speech at the last meeting, and I always like short meetings, so I'd just like to say I have enjoyed the experience and hope we've made some small contribution to education. This might be the time that I don't think I've ever told very many people this, but I grew up in West Tennessee in a rural area, and there was a terrible school system there. And it was like, we didn't have kindergarten, and it was first grade through 12th grade. And I think there may have been 30 books in the entire library. And we had substandard facilities, instructional material, and my father owned a drugstore, and I learned to read reading comic books because I was not taught at school, and I always hoped we could do better than that in Murfreesboro, and that's really why I've been involved. So anyway, I'm proud of our school system and hope that doesn't happen to anybody else in Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopper.
Well said.
And I'd just like to say we're going to really miss you a lot. You have good business sense, and you've always put the children first. You've kept in mind what the teachers really need in the classroom to do what they need to do with the children. It's never been about honor or glory. You've just done this you've been a volunteer for many years on the board. And I think people twisted your arm to vote each time, or to run each time you were up for election, and I'm really glad you stuck with it as long as you did. I think there are a lot of children who've benefited from your leadership, and we really appreciate the time and effort you've spent with the system. Gonna miss you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being with all of y'all. I've either known you personally or as board members for a long time, and feel like family here.
That's beautifully said, Susan. I can't think of anything to come after.
Dr. Gilbert?
And on behalf of the teachers, thank you so much, and the administrators of Murfreesboro City.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We would like to congratulate the following who have received Chamber of Commerce Business Educational Partnership mini grants: Tony Downs from Black Fox, Felicia Jackson from Cason Lane, Chandra Verbick from the Discovery School, Doris Coffey from Hobgood, and Courtney Brown from Mitchell Nelson Elementary. So congratulations, teachers. That funding will provide additional supplies, additional incentive for doing great things in the classroom. And so we certainly appreciate Lee Rennick and her work with the Chamber BEP.
Dr. Gilbert, do you
Certainly.
mind just reading those titles? I think they're
Okay,
great.
sure.
I just think they're great.
Okay, surely. Tony Downs, her title for her grant and for her project is Spaghetti Garden. For Felicia Jackson, Project CSI, and knowing Felicia, Felicia's a real avid teacher for science and math, so I can certainly see that. Ms. Verbick, Making Engineering Elementary One Lego at a Time. Doris Coffey, Going Green in No Can of Worms. And Courtney Brown, Where in the World is Mr. J?
It just sounded like, it really captures the creativity of what the teachers are doing, and it sounds like the kids are going to have such a good time, so thank
Exactly.
you.
No problem. No, our teachers are very creative, and so that's certainly indicative of that. Congratulations to Jennifer Austin, who is in collaboration with Dr. Rebecca Watts, and I know her as Susie Watts. She's in the Department of Educational Leadership at MTSU. Jennifer, working with Susie, received a $2,250 literacy grant for John Pittard from Phi Kappa Phi for their proposal. It was entitled Promoting Interest in Literacy in Mathematics and Science, and those funds will be used to purchase Kindles and e-books and tangible books, all relating to science and math. A reminder that Teacher Appreciation Week will be May 3rd through the 7th, and National Teacher Day will be May 4th. And then, in recognition of Hobgood's being named a Title I school, we will be having a celebration at Hobgood May the 18th at 1 o'clock. We feel that it's very important that we celebrate, and certainly that is a well-deserved recognition. So that will be held again, the Hobgood celebration, on May the 18th. I'd like to remind you that you do have a special board meeting that will be a policy review meeting on Tuesday, May 18th at 6:30 at the central office. Our retirees will be honored at a dinner with you on Thursday, May the 20th at 6 o'clock at John Pittard. And then we're having a very special event called Hats Off to You. This will be a celebration for employee recognition on Monday, May 24th. At the Doubletree. There we will be recognizing our Teachers of the Year, our teachers, but not just our teachers, but also our employees that have gone beyond and really helped make this school district so very special. So we're very excited about that, and appreciate Cheryl Harris. As you can see, she's going to be pretty busy, and that's a good thing. It keeps her out of trouble. But those are your communications.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Now we're ready for consent items. Can I get a motion for the approval of our consent items?
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Action items, Dr. Gilbert.
Okay. Your action, our first action item is approval of the general purpose cafeteria and ESP budgets. As you know, one of the primary responsibilities of this position is to present to you a budget. You also know that we have been working to do that over the past several weeks. We met with each principal, we've met with each department head, and I really want to thank Golina Bell and Gary Anderson for their work. Golina, particularly her leadership in finance, she is one of the unsung heroes of Murfreesboro City, and having worked with her over the past several months, I really appreciate her work. So, Golina, just know that we appreciate you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the man who really holds the money, I guess, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. We're very proud to present to you a balanced budget, especially in this economic situation that we find ourselves in the state of Tennessee. Our general purpose budget is established at $51.168 million. and in revenues and the corresponding expenditures. By having a balanced budget, that means we're not intending to dip into the fund balance. We are, as I said, proud to be able to present this to you. Also in the budget that you'll be looking at a little later is the extended school program budget and the school nutrition budget, but we're going to be asking for your votes this evening on all three of those budgets. One of the items that you asked me to get more information for you on at the last work session was on the transportation, and you had asked me to come up with interest from students at Bradley and Hobgood, because the discussion was about Discovery School and then Bradley and Hobgood. We emailed that to you last night, and there's one on your desk as well. There are quite a few students that expressed an interest from those two schools if we did provide transportation to them. The biggest issue that we have in the two options that I presented to you is that to make this happen for those schools, we would have to change the bell times or the start times for up to 4 schools. Those two plus 2 more to have corresponding shuttle times. When going through all the data and looking at it, what that would do is affect over 2,454 students and families that we'd be asking to change their routines. It would also affect 188 professional staff, 62 support staff, and 34 food service and custodial staff, for a total of 2,738 families would be affected if we implemented either one of these choice options for Bradley or Hobgood. That puts us in a very tough situation, and the other issue is if we were to do that and needed to get more buses, it takes no less than 3 to 6 months to order a bus and get it delivered. So what I'm trying to say to you is we really cannot implement appropriately these choice options that we've given you for your consideration with this short of time frame to do it in. So with that said, we wanted to go over the other question was about Discovery School, about continuing the bus service or stopping it. We had put it in the budget to take that part out to help balance the budget. As you know, the information we had in there was an amount of money that, although not tremendous, was significant to our overall budget. With that, we are at a point where we're asking you to review the budget, make your decisions on it, and see which way we need to go. If you do determine to either keep the Discovery School transportation, then we feel it would be appropriate if you would set some criteria on that transportation. And Ms. Baker has talked with us about criteria and the need for that if we continue this. Things such as free and reduced lunch, students who really have issues if they can't get to school. So we're not creating a barrier for students to attend those schools. But we wanted to point that out to you, the situation that we have here with the budget proposal and with the Bradley and Hobgood information, so you'll know where you're headed as you get ready to proceed on your vote.
Ms. Phillips.
I want to applaud you, Mr. Anderson. I said I want to applaud you, Mr. Anderson, and Dr. Gilbert, and Miss Bell, whoever was involved in thinking about how to prevent us from setting up a barrier for those students. That's my hats off to you, because that has been my primary goal, to make sure that those children who fit the academic criteria and choose to go to that school do have access to that school through transportation if they need it, if their circumstances warrant it. So that's something that's been very important to me. You know, I have a question for Ms. Baker. It was brought to my attention that possibly the designation choice for Bradley and Hobgood might be a misnomer because it's not the same as what happens at the Discovery School, because there is no academic criteria, and because the entrance requirements to Bradley and Hobgood are very much identical to what it would be at our other school locations. And so I'm not sure that choice would be the right designation for those schools because the entrance requirements are the same as our other schools, and I don't know if that would make a difference, Ms. Baker.
The system's chosen to designate them as choice schools. They do have a small zone. It's my understanding that if all children within the zone attend Bradley and Hobgood, that it doesn't fill the schools. So we have designated them as choice. You are correct, they don't have any academic requirements for obtaining admission to them other than you have to apply to attend Bradley and Hobgood, and you'll be put on a waiting list if it is full. But the system has designated them as not fully zoned schools, so people can choose to attend them regardless of where they live within the city limits.
Is that the way it's also done at, say, Northfield?
At Northfield?
Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a zone, but if they have extra spaces, can a child from out of zone attend?
I would have to defer to Dr. Gilbert or Mr. Anderson. They handle zone waivers.
Yes, parents can apply for a zone waiver to those schools from out of the zone, and depending on space and what the needs are, we would grant that on a normal situation if there's something special that they need.
So it seems like that's very much the same as what happens at Bradley and Hobgood. So I do think there is a difference there because there is the academic criteria required for the Discovery School. And so for that reason, and because there is no zone, because they do have the academic criteria, I really hope that we can support some sort of plan with what was it, with the written criteria, is that what you called it, Mr. Anderson? That would, some parameters set up on that to make that, so just so it's truly a choice school for those children who meet the academic criteria.
And I think that one point that you made, I think in looking back at the minutes, I think the spirit was that it would be for those students who would not be able to attend, that it's not a matter of necessarily convenience, but it is of need.
Right, right.
Ms. Duggan.
I would think we would need to have considerable conversation about the criteria for the transportation. I'm in agreement with that. However, I think that we have to be very careful that we don't send a message that it's only minority students or lower socioeconomic students that might need help with transportation. I would really want us to guard our conversation about that, and that is not the message we send. Because I had emails from individuals who would not fall into either one of those categories, but yet they would definitely need help with transportation or either some type of assistance maybe with ESP. So I would just like to say that as a board, I hope that we'll be careful in our criteria that we don't send a message that I don't think we would intend to send with that issue. But I do think having some criteria would be very good, and I think that's something that we need to work on, and I too would like to thank Mr. Anderson and others in the central office for all the work that's been done to help us get this information. Because I think it would not be good to change the bell times at schools where you have kids now starting at 7:30 and now they might be going at 8:30 because some of those children would be in our buildings for 2.5 hours before the academic day started. And that's just too much to expect of our young children.
Dr. Butchman, then Ms. Phillips.
I'd like to thank you all, too, for the work you've done on the research on this transportation issue. As I looked over some of your notes you sent us, I noticed that in the Discovery School, the number of students that we're transporting now looks like it's around 27 sixth graders, which will leave us, then about 32 fifth graders, which will be here with us next year, and then the numbers get significantly lower as you get down to fourth, third, all the way to kindergarten, just having 3 students. So we're only looking at under 50 students left if we were to say this year we're going to leave transportation for the Discovery School in our budget with the understanding that we're going to phase that out next year for the following school year. That would give these parents over a year to plan and prepare and let them know that we can't add it to the other schools, and this year especially, and I think they're saying next year, when we're doing budgets, it's going to be equally as hard, with cuts possibly. So I can't see that we would need to add anything to our budget, but maybe have a plan to go ahead and support the transportation this year, because at that point, we're looking again at under 50 students who would have to make other accommodations, and that would give them well over a year to be able to do that.
I think one thing, too, that we may want to think about, we're not sure what's coming down the pike as far as with the what now is called No Child Left Behind, but we're not sure how that's going to impact. I think when we look at the possibility of Bradley and Hobgood, at some point, will those schools become magnets? So I think that within this next year, we'll see perhaps some changes in our school system that may impact that decision, too.
I appreciate Ms. Duggan's sensitivity to handling that. I just wanted to state that. I really do appreciate that because I think she's right on target about that sensitivity. I would hate to tie our hands with planning next year's budget with this year's budget, or tie up contingencies, because it doesn't change the basic fact that this is a school with an academic criteria, and if we take away transportation, there will certainly be some children who will have that opportunity even taken away from them, even though they meet the academic criteria, purely based on what their families can or cannot provide, and that doesn't change. And in referencing the economic downturn, it is true that in times of economic downturn in our country, more children ride the bus. More children definitely ride the bus, and I think that will affect busing at that time too. Parents lose jobs, they lose transportation, things happen, and more kids ride the bus. So I would not be in favor of designating this as the sole last year that children in need would require transportation get it. I would not be in favor of that.
Mr. Campbell.
Dr. Buttram, it actually would be 90 students, I think, if we lose the 27 sixth graders.
And then look at the 32 fifth graders that would be coming in as sixth graders.
Okay.
We still provide their transportation, but after that year, how many fourth graders do you see? Okay.
So it would be approximately 90 students from what we have now for next school year.
Right, but then it drops
Then it would drop
significantly.
more.
And it looks like, as we've added the students to the Discovery School, fewer and fewer ride the bus. I think we had 10 in first grade and 3 in kindergarten this year and 10 in second. So very few students, you think about our total student population.
I think we need to make sure that we set the criteria for students going to Discovery School as far as procedure for them to ride a bus from their home school to Discovery, because I think there is some differences perhaps from different schools or different areas of the city on how those students are taken care of in the morning if parents take them to their home school, and whether or not the parents have to take them, or whether or not they can actually ride a bus that would come by their house going to their home school.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
And we do have, I know that, and I think Gary has those numbers, but I know that there is one student that we definitely pick up at their home because of the need to do that. So I think you're right, and I think that it would be incumbent upon the administration to take a very careful look at what the needs are of parents, and to make sure that the students that do meet that criteria are able to access Discovery School.
I have a couple of comments. I really appreciated that my children could ride the bus when they went to Reeves Rogers and Northfield. That was a great, it was a great convenience to me, and of course, it wasn't the only thing I could do, but it was a really good thing to be able to do that. We're struggling with a tough budget year, and it does cost money to bus those children. We need to think about fairness, and I know Mrs. Phillips you're always the best advocate for our children and fairness and equity among the schools, and I do think that if we continue to bus children at Discovery School, that we do need to do the same for Hobgood and Bradley. And I don't recall how we ended up actually starting busing at Discovery School, because we have a long history of not providing buses for Cason Lane when it opened, not providing buses for Siegel, not providing buses for anybody out of district until the Discovery School. That was a little bit of an anomaly, but it's been a really good thing for those people. So, I can see the point on each side, but, this is a tough budget year. I want every penny that we can have any kind of, any wiggle room we have, it needs to go into the classroom. It needs to go toward instruction, towards supporting our teachers and what they do. So, I'm reluctant to expand how much money we spend, and I also don't feel that we can not expand it if we don't cut back at Discovery School. I think perhaps Dr. Buttram has a reasonable idea. We just have to find the money to do it that wouldn't hurt children, So it's a tough issue.
Mr. Hopper.
If I recall correctly, when the Discovery School was established, there was some concern about it being considered to be an elitist school, and for that reason, the board actually discussed at a board meeting that we would like to provide transportation so anybody that qualified would be able to attend that school. So a little history for you on that.
Thank you. Ms. Phillips.
My colleagues here on the board have heard some of what I want to say, but I want to say it for the folks at home who have not heard it. When the vision of the Discovery School was first presented to the board, I had my concerns about it becoming an elitist school. But when that vision was expanded to include transportation for all the children who met the academic criteria, who chose to go to that school, then I was very proud. I was very proud of our system for holding itself to a higher standard. And because what it meant was that you could have been raised in the finest estate home in the city or the most humble home in the city. But if you met the academic criteria and you wanted to go, you had the transportation. You had a way through the shuttle buses to get to that school. If we remove any form of transportation to those children who really need it, then we are removing that opportunity. And we're removing children who meet the criteria, and for no other reason except their transportation would they be taken away from that school. So, to me, I sit there and go, what children is it all right for us to do without? How many children? Whose children? And for me, I find that unacceptable to cut those children off for that reason alone. So I hope that we can find a way to be able to continue transportation to a school that has an academic criteria and no zone for those students who have a real need for that transportation.
Mr. Campbell.
The first Discovery School, or so to speak, was actually at Bellwood, am I right? And let me ask this question because I may need some clarification. Before we had the Discovery School at Bellwood, we had what was called Merit program, wasn't that it, in the city? Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, students were pulled out for maybe an hour a week, 2 hours a week, am I right?
A day a week, one whole day.
And then it was decided that in order to meet their needs better than what we were doing with the pull-out program, that we would establish a school, or at that time, the board established the school, which became Bellwood and Discovery School, and so those students who had been pulled out for merit were allowed to go to Bellwood. Am I right? Is that the way it got started?
Well, actually, they're two different things, and I think that there's real confusion. What you have at Discovery School is a high academic school that is not related directly to the gifted, which is what you're talking about. Giftedness in Tennessee, and Priscilla's here, and so Priscilla, if I say anything wrong, you may have to come to the microphone. But giftedness in Tennessee is considered a disability. Those students are so gifted that they no longer can be served adequately in their own classrooms. What you have at Discovery School is not based on giftedness, but on high achieving, so that the students are tested. And in fact, you have some students who may not go to the school, even if they're gifted, because they do not score high enough. If you'll remember, we talked about the giftedness, and we said there are gifted in every school. The gifted has nothing to, when you go to an IEP, very rarely would you see, and you would not see it in Murfreesboro City, I don't think, in any IEP that would say that you need to go to a certain school because of your giftedness, because we do have in every school special educators that are trained to meet the needs of the gifted students. So giftedness is a whole separate discussion from what you're talking about with high achievement. If you look at the board policy, if you look at the admissions criteria, there is nothing related to giftedness or IEPs. In fact, it is pretty clear that those two things are separate. But what you do have is a high achieving school. And the merit was related to the giftedness. And what happened with the merit is we really dispersed the merit program and no longer pull those students out. But in every school, it is the responsibility of the teachers, it's the responsibility of the special educators to meet the needs of those students. And that's why you find gifted children in every school. What you have at Discovery, though, is you have students who have qualified based on academic achievement, based on testing.
Okay.
Ms. Phillips.
My understanding was, as a board member, when that merit was disbanded, when the Discovery School was open, was that it was to take the place, and also to be inclusive of high achieving students, but it was also the program to replace the merit program. That that was my understanding at the time.
Priscilla, would you mind coming to the microphone?
I mean, I understand what you were saying about the giftedness differences and all that.
Right. But I think we do need to get a history, and I think that it is very confusing, because I know in some of the emails, and really would like to do this as much for the public as anything, I know that in some of the emails the term was referred to that this was a school for special needs, and in fact that is not the case.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, if you would, let me go over the policy that relates to merit. And this is really, it's not a policy, it's an administrative directive. And this was effective 7/05, but it's the Murfreesboro Exploration, it's the merit, will cease to exist at the beginning of the 2005-2006 academic school year. If a parent or teacher believes his child is intellectually gifted, the special education referral process should be followed. A student identified as intellectually gifted is not automatically offered entrance into the Bellwood, at that time, Discovery School. Entry into Bellwood Discovery School will be on a space available basis. Students are required to meet academic criteria and to have a positive teacher recommendation. So, Priscilla, would you go over giftedness, because it's something that has been with us for quite a while in Murfreesboro as far as trying to meet the needs. I can recall when I was here previously, we had quite a conversation with the state when they said that we were over-identifying gifted students, and caused a little turmoil, I remember, with the county, Priscilla. We had quite a discussion in your office one day about that. But if you could review a little bit about giftedness for us, that would be great.
Okay. Well, as Dr. Gilbert said, we were cited, I guess, actually started about 8 or 9 years ago as being having over-identification of gifted children, and we were, and that was true. Because giftedness in Tennessee, as she said, is a disability. That's not federal, that's state, but we recognize giftedness in the state of Tennessee by the same guidelines we recognize other disabilities on the federal level. So a child may have a very high IQ, and that's as Kinsella was explaining last time, that's the first prong. They may have a high IQ that doesn't qualify them as gifted. They are gifted when they have difficulty accessing the general ed curriculum, and their giftedness is preventing them from accessing that. That's when a child has an IEP. So there may be a child at Discovery School or any other school with very high IQ, but they aren't necessarily identified as gifted.
One of the things, in looking again at another administrative directive that has to do with admission to Discovery, and by the way, I will be looking very carefully at some wording in here, but it talks about that students will be selected using a specially designed matrix that assigns points to several assessment measures, including reading and math achievement test data, standardized verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative ability test data, and a local performance-based task. Once points are assigned to each student's matrix, students will be placed in rank order, and they will be offered places in Discovery School classes according to their rankings on the matrix and based on the number of spaces available in each grade level. It talks about 2 screening windows, and then it goes on to say that students who have a current IEP from within the school district or outside the district should submit that plan. But then it's very clear in the directive that it is not linked to giftedness, but it is also very clear, as you have said, the term high achieving school is certainly appropriate, Ms. Phillips, which you've continually called it, and you're exactly right. It is high achieving.
Thank you. Dr. Buttram, Dr. Andrews, and Ms. Phillips.
My comment was going to be much what Ms. Van Treese said about the over-identification, and then that is one reason why we moved to making sure everyone understood that the Discovery School was not necessarily for the certified gifted child, but it could possibly be a placement for that child. So in other words, every child that's gifted was not necessarily a Discovery School child for that reason. And I think we made that very clear when we were starting to open the school, because we had so many questions about our merit program being canceled at the same time. And of course we canceled that because many of our former merit students or students that would have been identified because they were high achieving and not necessarily gifted continued to go to that school. So I don't think it hurt anyone in closing the merit classes, but I think it helped our schools create teachers who were capable of dealing with those special needs children, and I think every school should have those. So again, we should have gifted children in every school and not just in one. I know we seem to have a lot in the Discovery School, but not because they're gifted.
Right.
Yeah, my recollection is similar, that we made it very clear that this was going to be a home for high-achieving children. We did want to be able to take care of the children that no longer qualified for merit and we no longer had the extra funding for, because that was part of the way that we were able to have the merit program, was through the special ed funding, and that was being taken away. So this was something that we thought would help everyone, and we wouldn't leave any parents and children out in the cold who were used to having the merit program. And the other thing that I come back to too is that I have always felt that I should feel I could have my child or grandchild at any school in this city and they would get a good education. And, you know, I've lived in the same house for 28 years, and we've had 3 zones. We're now Zone Mitchell-Nielsen. So my children didn't get to go there, but, you know, that's where they would be. And I really think that as a board, we need to make sure that every single child in this city gets a good education no matter what school they go to. That, to me, is very important. I'm really happy that we have a Discovery School and that there are a lot of children that go there, but I'm not going to worry about that child if that child can't go to the Discovery School and they go to another school, because that other school's good. We got rezoned twice, and there were some people who were just so worried about it. Oh no, we have to go to this new school, and Reeve Rogers is so great. And, well, you know, we'll go there. It was a great school. Northfield, you helped open it. So that was a wonderful school. They put us back. Reeves Rogers was a great school. So it is difficult, and we need to be fair. We need to think about money. We need to make sure every child in this system gets the best education we can give them. It's hard. It's a difficult situation.
Thank you. Ms. Phillips?
One thing I want to just take a moment to acknowledge is that for a board member, and I'm sure for some of our staff too, it is very frustrating because Mr. Consilla, who is an employee of Murfreesboro City Schools, shared with us that when our 6th graders from the Discovery School transition into the county school system, all but a handful of them qualify for the county Spectrum program, which is their gifted program. So the county is allowed to identify our children as gifted, whereas we are not. And I hope that at some time, and that's not fair to our children, it is absolutely unfair to our children. And I hope that sometime that we can register a protest or ask the state to review what's happening with our children, because our children aren't not getting the funding that they deserve and the support that they deserve. Because if they qualify for the gifted program in the county, they should certainly qualify for it right here in the city. So I hope that we can write a letter and state that.
And this is something we will be looking at. In fact, I was at Discovery the other day talking with the teachers, and I have already talked with Priscilla about this too, and we're going to make sure. One of the things that we did previously was that we had to have everything set for those students when they were ready to go to the county, and I think that's exactly what we'll do again.
They do an admirable job, just really a fine job of doing that.
Right, and we have that collaborative relationship with the county so that we feel very comfortable with talking with them.
Right. Any more comments? Questions? Now we're back to square one with transportation. We're back to where, I know you're looking for a vote or a motion or something to change so we can go ahead and approve it.
I'm not sure I understood what the recommendation was, though.
They didn't accept it.
Mr. Anderson?
The budget that we have presented to you, as I said earlier, is a balanced budget, and it does not have transportation in it for Discovery School. If in the board's will to change that, then you would have to amend what we have presented to you.
Ms. Duggan and then Ms. Phillips.
I was just going to make a motion, Ms. Wade. So do you want me to go? Do you want, if Ms. Duggan had a comment? Or?
You have a comment?
I have a question.
Question.
We had a pretty long discussion in our last budget meeting about this. And I left that meeting with the understanding that we would leave transportation for Discovery School in the budget for the next year. If we do that, and I may have misunderstood what we were totally discussing because there was a lot of conversation. However, if we leave it in the budget, then what would have to be, how would the budget be rearranged to absorb this, what was it, $60,000, $70,000?
$53,500 is what we had taken out out of the transportation line. So if you were to put it back in, we'd have to determine how that would be put back in.
the one thing that I would like to see is if you do leave transportation in, I think that what Ms. Phillips says is absolutely true, that we need to look at a criteria. And I like the term that absolutely need it, that need that, because I think there's a vast difference in want and need. And I think that that you would probably not have that much money expended if we look at the students who need it. Now, I think that we have to be cautious, as you've said, about what that criteria is, because we don't want to exclude those students who do qualify and cannot provide transportation. If we were to look at leaving that much money in, if we had to have that much money, then I would be looking, at this point, I would have to be looking probably at what would least impact instruction, but I think what we have done is cut pretty close. In fact, there's some areas that we may have cut too close. I hope Mr. Anderson is right about the cost of gasoline, for example. But I think that we would have to look, if we did have to cut, then I think we would be looking at the areas, if we were going to cut, for example, positions, it would be those system-wide positions that we're not showing evidence of the kind of growth we would like to see in test scores. I'm not saying that's where the cuts would have to come, but I am saying that if you leave in as much, if you allocate as much to Discovery, if we find that indeed all those students that are being served with transportation are in need of transportation, then I would be looking at obviously, with my love of instruction, I'm going to do everything I can do not to impact it.
Because with this budget, it represents a $1.5 million decrease already.
That's right.
Because
that's right. And I think that it would be easier for us to say, well, let's look someplace else, but we, as you know, are realistically looking at some roofs and also some infrastructure that our principals are in dire need of, and that, frankly, we're going to have to save as much in fund balance as we can. I really am hesitant about dipping. Mr. Anderson reminds me of that quite frequently, that we do have a lot of roofs and a lot of air conditioning, and if we have to use, I think that, I would hope that if we do look at criteria for transportation, that it would not, the numbers that you have there that are currently being used for transportation would not be that high.
Well, at this point, I just cannot, speaking strictly for myself, vote that we remove transportation altogether, because I think parents have been given a different message, and we need to be true to our word.
Right.
You know, if you're going to have a phase-out plan or having some criteria to see if there are people who, you know, actually do not have to have it in order to get their child there. Because I know there's been lots of discussion about just because of where Discovery School is located and the road itself, you know, the access, that it's high traffic. We all know that and understand that. Also, and I've said this in every budget meeting, that I think we need to tighten our belts as tight as we can, because we don't know what's going to happen this next year, and we don't know what's going to happen the following year, and we don't want to find ourselves in a bind. So it's a difficult time, and we'll have to make difficult decisions, but I do not want to see us having to go to cutting positions. And I know that you're looking very closely at positions to see which positions are actually impacting our students the most. And I trust your judgment on that. But I do think we need to just look very carefully at the transportation this year and put together some criteria. I think we have to, you know, fulfill what those parents are expecting. I think that's the least at this point we should do.
Ms. Phillips.
Yes. I think she said it all for me. That's exactly where I stand, too. I think we need to fulfill that. In the last year's budget, did we go into fund balance, Mr. Anderson? I can't remember.
We are not completed with this current year's budget now.
Did we have it budgeted to go into our fund balance?
Last year, we did budget to go into our fund balance, yes.
And the year before that, did we budget to go into our fund balance?
I believe we did.
And the year before that? So what I'm saying is it's not, it's not that unusual procedure is what I mean. Is what I'm trying.
I think the difference here, and that my concern is that the prediction of what the budget will hold for next year, and also I think, Mr. Anderson, what was the estimate for the roofs and the, do you remember the air conditioning units that we need now?
We're looking at a minimum for our air conditioning units of between $4 and $5 million. And I think our roof expenditure, based on not the first year, but over a period of time, was another $4 or $5 million.
So I'm very content with what we've done, and I don't have a problem. I think you're right about transportation. I just think that we need to look carefully at the criteria, what you've said.
Dr. Andrews, Mr. Campbell, and then Ms. Phillips.
No, I'm done.
You through?
Uh-huh.
All righty.
Ms. Baker, if we keep the buses at Discovery School, we still have the issue of inequity with Hobgood and Bradley. Is that not the case?
You would need to establish a rational basis for why you're providing transportation at Discovery School and not the other two. I believe y'all have discussed that the academic testing to get into that school is what appears to make it different.
Do you think that would hold up?
That's the rational basis that y'all have discussed.
So you think that might be okay? I'm just trying, I don't want to end up
I can't say how it would work out, but that is a rational basis for why you would treat it different. That's what y'all voiced.
Mr. Anderson, the cost of the buses for Discovery School, close to $50,000. That was in our budget.
$53,500.
I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell. I'm in a conversation. Mrs. Duggan, Dr. Butcher, and then back to Ms. Phillips.
Just really a comment. I know that the city in and of itself has really tightened their budget. They've decreased positions that they have. People did not get raises. There may have even been some discussion of cutting current salaries. We know that state law protects teachers from that happening to them. Am I correct that in over the past 5 to 6 years that we have not gotten additional monies from the city, that what we have gotten from them has maintained?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think that, I know that the last time that I talked with Mr. Lyons, he was looking at not finishing his budget and still having some cuts made. I hope that doesn't impact our budget.
Absolutely. And I just think in light of that, the fact that we have not gotten additional monies from the city over the past 5 to 6 years, although they have been great to work with, that's, money's tight. I think it's going to continue to get tighter. And when we look at the amount of money needed for infrastructure with air conditionings and the need for roofs, those are things that have to be done in order to house children in those buildings appropriately. I think we've got to just be very careful. And I thank you and Mr. Anderson and Ms. Bell both for all of your work.
Dr. Butcher, and then Ms. Phillips.
And my question or statements are going to be related to the budget in general, not necessarily to the transportation issue, but how many out-of-county students do we currently have in Murfreesboro City?
We have 11 that we have in our budget for this coming year.
For the coming year, there are 11?
Right. And I think we experienced 11 this past year. We had budgeted, I think, for 14. We had budgeted for, right over 14, and we are experiencing 11 at this time.
Well, before we approve the budget for revenues, I would like to move that we increase the amount of out-of-county tuition for each student to equal $2,000 for this year, and then be raised a $1,000 increment for the next 2 years to cap at $4,000, which is the amount currently being spent by Murfreesboro City through our local funds, matched by about the $4,000 from the state. So the people coming from out of our county into our school system are basically getting their child's elementary education for a tuition of about $4,000, eventually will be $4,000 a year in 2 years, and at that point, it'll still just be half of what it is right now. So I think the $900 that we currently charge them is much too low. I'm the one who brought it up last year to ask that it be raised. It was not. Again, I think that in light of now we know how much we do spend per child, $900 is much too less. I don't think raising it to $4,000 immediately would be the proper thing to do, but I think to $2,000 this coming school year and then $1,000 for the next 2 additional till it caps out at 4 would be my motion.
Ms. Phillips?
Ms. White, there's a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Ms. Ridley, do you mind reading the...
And you can
are
ask
there
for
any
discussion.
Yeah, any questions?
I want to discuss it, but I wanted to finish the transportation issue first. I'll be glad to discuss it.
Are there any other... Ms. Beck, I have a question. Now, they need to vote on this motion because it's on the floor and it has got a second. Normally, your discussion comes in before the vote. We can go ahead and vote and then we can discuss. Can they not amend some things if they want to amend later? Can they amend? If they need to vote, but then Nancy has brought up that she'd like to have discussion. Normally, discussion comes before the vote.
And the reason I made the motion now, Ms. Wade, is because if we decide to pass this, it would actually change the amount of revenue that would be in our budget for next year. It wouldn't change it a lot, but it would be enough to impact half of the cost of Discovery School transportation, possibly. So it would be revenue that would come into our system from those out-of-county students. So that's why I thought I should make the motion now to change it before we vote to approve the budget.
You got a question, Dr. Andrew?
Just a comment. I think it'd be pretty hard to predict because, you get to a certain point and those children won't be coming, so you won't have that revenue at all. So won't have the revenue from the state or from them. So I think it's hard to predict how much money you would get. You might just be a wash. They end up with the same amount. Half the children don't come, half of them still do. It's the same amount.
Ms. Phillips?
Are these 11 children primarily the children of teachers, or what brings them to our county?
Our wonderful education system here.
I know. What else could it possibly be? but I was just wondering, are these teachers' children from out of county? So.
I don't track that myself, so I don't really know where they come from. I'm sorry, I don't look at that number.
I think that's what we've been told in the past.
Am I wrong if we have a teacher in our system and they don't live in our county, they can bring their children with them? Am I correct? I think that's correct. So I would assume that these students that you're talking about are not students or children of our city school employees. Am I right?
Actually, I don't see that,
No.
so I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Can anybody answer that question? Ma'am?
They pay.
Teachers pay?
The teachers pay the $900?
So this would
We
affect
don't.
the teachers also, this amount we're talking about?
If those are their children.
Mr. Hopper?
This topic was brought up several years ago, and at that time, the board was given information about how many children were teachers' children and how many were, and that type thing. At that time, the board concluded it was not a material issue, After we found out or received that information, I would suggest that you research that, and you could make a better decision. You can always come back and amend the budget or always come back and raise that.
Can we raise it after we set the budget and say this is what we're going to charge them?
You can amend the budget at any time later. Of course, with the tuition like this, the amendment would need to be made prior to them entering into the school system for next year, so you would need to do it, before August, at least, before school starts?
I think we already have some students who have registered and possibly even gotten into our Discovery School from out of county. So, I mean, they already are here.
For next year?
Mm-hmm. So again, I mean, I'm made my case in the fact that we have $4,000 from our city taxes being given to every child for their education, and another approximately $4,000 from the state. And I know we get that money for those children, but I think $900 is way too low for what they get from our school system. And again, my recommendation was just to increase that to $2,000 for next year with the increases until it reaches the $4,000 mark, which would be half of the total cost of the child. Well, that'll increase by that in a couple of years too, by the way.
Mr. Campbell.
Can I offer an amendment to our motion, being I seconded it? I am not comfortable with requiring our teachers to pay for their child's education if they are an employee of our system. There are a few things I think that our teachers deserve, and I think if just because they live outside of Murfreesboro City, to require them to, if they bring their children into school to where they are employed, for them to have to pay a tuition. I did not realize that was happening. So I would amend the motion, if you would agree, if I can do that.
Well, I would have to do that, Mr.
Yes.
Campbell, and I will be glad to do that because I did not realize those numbers that we were given included. I thought those were the 11 that pay tuition, but if the teachers do pay, they were included in that number. But I didn't think the teachers paid either. But I will amend my motion to say that this would apply to out-of-county students who are not the children or custodial children of a Murfreesboro City School employee.
Out of county or out of city?
Out of county.
Out of county.
Yeah, so in other words, because out of city do not pay a tuition, so out of county.
Are you willing to second that, Mr. Campbell?
Yes, ma'am.
It's been a motion and a second. Mrs. Ridley, would you please read that motion, and then we'll ask for a vote.
Dr. Buttram moved to increase tuition for out-of-county students to $2,000 for next year, and then the tuition would increase by $1,000 increments for the next 2 years to cap out at $4,000, but this would not apply to out-of-county students who are the custodial children of a Murfreesboro City School employee.
Thank you. Call the roll, Ms. Ridley.
Dr. Andrews?
No.
Dr. Buttram?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Duggan?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Pass.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Wade?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Now, we're here for a motion for the transportation.
And On my motion, I make a motion that we amend the budget to include transportation for the Discovery School and leave the administration to set the parameters as they see fit based on need.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. I think you've heard the motion. Mrs. Ridley, please call, excuse me, question.
Yeah. Now, if we do this, this means we're going to have to find the $53,000 somewhere else?
We will have to find whatever the cost will be. Once the parameters are set and we determine how many children, then we would need to find.
Okay, so there's a possibility, say you set the parameters and find out that there's only a need for 50 students as opposed to 98. That lowers the cost, correct? Because that's all we would supply transportation to at that point?
Depends on where they're located.
Yeah, it depends, because if we still have to run a bus to that area, still the cost is still there. So you could actually have 25 kids and have the same cost.
Oh, depending on which.
Because they're going all over the place.
Okay. So, but the most we would have to find would be the 53,000.
53.5, huh?
Are there any other questions?
I have one question I just thought of. I think there was one child whose parent does not take them to a school in the morning. I wonder if we could just have transportation in the evening. What would that save anything? I mean, you only have one child that's getting picked up at home. Just a question.
This is just Linda's opinion.
Uh-huh.
And in thinking about the spirit of what I'm hearing, what you're wanting to make sure is that every child who has tested and qualifies for Discovery can access that school. That means if the parents can take them, great. But if we have parents, for whatever reason, who cannot, then that's going to be the defining criteria. And I would think that would be true. It would seem that, just on the surface, just looking at it now, not spending time with it, that whatever the parameters are in the morning may also be the parameters in the afternoon, but certainly that may not necessarily be true. But I think that the governing guideline, as far as I'm concerned, would be what Ms. Phillips has said about the need to, that we want the students to access it.
I was also
If there's a
thinking
need for that.
you could possibly move the start time up to 8, and then parents would have an easier time getting their children to the Discovery School at 8, because now they're getting them to another school at 8 or whenever, 7:30.
And we can
So we
look at
might be
that.
able to move that time up, but yet in the afternoons, they may be at work or not be able to go pick their child up, or where it's more of an issue that they need to have their child be brought home. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I know this has not been easy for you, Dr. Gilbert, Mr. Anderson, or Ms. Bell, but in order for the budget to be presented, we need to go ahead, and we've had a lot of discussion, a lot of questions. We need to go ahead and take the vote, Ms. Ridley, and I know everybody's heart is in the right place for this vote. It's just not an easy vote. I know you will set the parameters fairly, justly, but we need to go ahead and vote. So Mr. Anderson, if he has to go dig out more money, he can start digging tonight and get with Dr. Gilbert. So, Ms. Ridley, if you'd please call the roll.
Dr. Buttram?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Duggan?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Dr. Andrews?
Aye.
Ms. Wade?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And again, I want to thank Mr. Anderson and Ms. Bell for their work. They've, and also Mr. Wilkerson and Ms. Van Treese and all those other folks who have budgets that we just continually have fun with them. It's just amazing.
Really need a final vote to accept the entire budget, because we voted on pieces, but not the whole budget yet.
All right. We're asking for a motion to approve the complete package.
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. Ms. Ridley, would you
I
please
would
stop?
like to just comment. I'm sorry. Any questions? I'd just like to comment. Okay, here we are. We're talking about an entire budget. I think everybody needs to know that we've had long meetings about this budget. We have pored over the budget. We have basically accepted the recommendations of our central office staff about what this budget needs to look like for next year. It is an extremely important budget, probably the toughest budget that I've ever seen have to be done. This budget may need to be modified during next year. If we have continuing shortfalls of revenue, it'll have to be modified. You all have done very well this year so far trying to cut back on things that we had put in the budget, and you're not spending that money. But there's been a great deal of thought and discussion that's gone on, and I just think we need to say that. We're not just taking this big budget and saying, yep, we're all in favor of it. So just wanted to make that comment before we voted.
That's a good point.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Duggan?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Dr. Andrews?
Aye.
Dr. Buttram?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Your second item under action items is has to do with tenure. So let me have, please, Lee, if you'll come to the podium, and you may as well stay there for a while.
Action item B, the following licensed employee will have met the requirements for tenure at the end of the 2009-10 school year and is recommended by the Director of Schools to receive tenure. Her name is Christy Glover.
Move we grant tenure.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. There's no need in calling this roll. I know there's not going to be any problem. So all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under reports and information, Mr. Wilkerson.
Personnel update has a completion of 90 days. You have Whitney Carr, an EA at Hobgood, Amanda Masteller, EA at Black Fox, Havana Payne, Special Ed EA in the Pre-K at Bellwood Bowden, Jana Phillips, EA at M&P, Pamela Sykes, EA at Bellwood Bowden, and Vera Warwick, Special Ed EA at Northfield. So just that report for your information.
Question, Mrs. and Dr. Andrews.
I just wanted to ask Mrs. Ridley, did we specifically pass all three of those budgets with that last motion? Okay, I just wanted to double check. I didn't want to leave this meeting as like just the general budget. I'm sorry I didn't catch that. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
We're on the behind tab 2, the budget information, where we are to date. We are in the positive category now, which means we are contributing back to our fund balance, $2,842,536. Last year at this time, we were up to $2,500,819, so we're to the good this year, $341,717, and we attribute that to two different things. One is conservative budgeting on revenue and watching our expenditures. We're at the 75% mark of our year, so we're 3/4 of the way through our fiscal year. On the next page, which is the revenue comparison, we have received 78.2% of our revenue, so we're slightly ahead of that. Last year at this time, we were at 76.7. On sales tax, from last year at this time, we're $300,774 short on sales tax collections. On property tax collections, though, we're up $511,781, which gives us that positive difference that we were hoping to get because we budgeted less, so that was a good thing. On the expenditure piece, we have spent 71.1% of our budget, whereas last year at this time we were 71.9%. So all said and done, we're doing okay. We're watching our expenditures, and we're still keeping a close eye on our revenues to make sure we don't have any issues here towards the end of the school year. Anyone have any questions on our budget information? Okay. The next item is the attendance report, and that's at your desk. We are experiencing right now a 19.55 PTR ratio, so we're under the 20 to 1 PTR, and our professional educator ratio was 13.45. That's all professional educators within the school building. We have 128 special ed students, not counting students for behavioral classes at John Pitter, but we have 128 special ed. We did drop in our total number this month as compared to last month. We lost 16 students this month, and as you know, this fluctuates up and down, but we are 48 students over where we were at this time last year. So our PTR ratio is holding well. Our attendance numbers are doing very well. We had 95.8 in our current month attendance, which is excellent rate. So that's the attendance information for you at this time. And this is through the 7th month as well.
Dr. Butterman, then Ms. Phillips.
Okay. And Mr. Anderson, I know you hear me or have heard me say something about this the last 3 meetings, but I want to point out something in our attendance for our enrollment. If we will look at our 5th grade numbers and our 6th grade numbers, and we are looking at schools, for instance, Black Fox is moving their 5th grade of 82 students to a grade level that has 5 teachers that currently has 122 students. So naturally, they look like they could possibly lose 1 teacher, possibly 2, if you think about losing 40 total students there. And then that school is going to be one that's going to be majorly impacted by the opening of the Buchanan Middle School. And so I'm really fearful when I look at these numbers, and you go down through there and you see where there's normal loss, like in Siegel, 108 5th graders to 79 6th graders. It looks like they naturally lose probably a couple of classes from 5th to 6th, and same way at Case and Lane. But these other schools that haven't experienced that and then have less 5th grade classes than they do 6th grade, they're in trouble going into the school year. But that's before they have a possibility of losing the first student. So please look at those numbers, because there's several positions that we would be in trouble with if we don't make and have to keep those teachers.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Anderson? If not, other business for the agenda for next month.
I'm just looking forward to our first official work session that will be ongoing.
Dr. Andrews and then Ms. Phillips.
I'd just like to say that I'm looking forward to working with Dennis Vernier next month. I think that, don't know if here he's here. Looking forward to that.
Mrs. Phillips?
I just want to thank the parents who were actively engaged in the busing issue, the transportation issue, and I see that one of them, Dr. McCarthy's here. Thank you for your input, and all the parents that sent emails and phone calls. I really appreciate your input.
Dr. Gilbert, do you have any last words?
It's a pleasure working with you as usual.
And certainly, not only we thank everybody for working hard, this is a hard-working board, and they're fixing to work harder on policy. So if there's nothing more, we are adjourned.